US President Joe Biden has addressed questions from the press in a rare solo news conference as he marked his first year in office. It's been a tumultuous year for Biden, with much of his agenda still stored in Congress. Caroline Malone has the details from Washington.
Well, Biden spoke on a wide number of issues, and starting with foreign policy. He said on Russia it would be a disaster for Moscow to further invade Ukraine. There would be significant harm on the Russian economy. There would be a cost of loss of life that would be heavy, and President Putin has a choice of diplomacy instead. Now, to the US economy, he said, well, there's been record job creation in the United States. There's been support for medical bills and managing the prices on those. And the infrastructure bill that he has managed to pass has meant that there's funding for roads and bridges and also drinking water pipes and for the internet. But of course, there is the issue of inflation at a 40-year high. He said it would be appropriate for the Federal Reserve to increase those interest rates later in the year. Now, Omicron still causing a problem in the United States, but Biden said that vaccines are a big tool that are helping 75% of the population now vaccinated here, and there are COVID-19 pills to help treat people. Let's hear more of what he had to say on that.
I know there's a lot of frustration and fatigue in this country. And we know why. COVID-19, Omicron has now been challenging us in a way that it's the new enemy. But while it's cause for concern, it's not cause for panic.
Well, looking forward, Biden said he does see a number of his future bills potentially helping. He's trying to push still the Build Back Better plan. That's the social and climate bill that he's been trying to get through Congress for many months. He said even getting parts of that bill passed would particularly help with childcare. It could get more women back into the workforce who left during the COVID-19 pandemic. He said it would help with drug prices, then decreasing the prices there. And overall, it would actually reduce the deficit and ease inflation rather than some of the concerns that people have that it would do the opposite. He said he's confident he will get the Build Back Better plan signed. And he is also confident that there will be some progress on voting rights bill as well. Of course, the midterms later this year in the United States, that's going to be an important time to see if there's further support for the Democrats or if they lose some of those seats in Congress. Caroline Malone, CGTN, Washington.
A year into Joe Biden's term, let's look back on his achievements and challenges.
So help me God. Congratulations, Mr. President.
When Biden began his four-year term last January, his approval rating was 56%. A year later, it has fallen to 42%. Only one of his six predecessors fared worse in these terms. That was Donald Trump. Biden took office pledging to lift the threat of COVID-19. In March, he signed a $1.9 trillion pandemic relief, which included direct payments for individuals and funds to help schools reopen. However, many criticize his handling of the pandemic, especially the emergence of the Delta variant. In terms of vaccines, about 3/4 of the population has had at least one dose, and about 2 in 3 are fully vaccinated. Economically, the U.S. ended 2021 with jobless claims at a 50-year low. The unemployment rate also fell significantly. However, unexpectedly, the country has also witnessed a phenomenon in the jobs market. In what's being dubbed the Great Resignation, millions of Americans have quit their jobs. Some industries are facing a labor shortage, something that's contributing to global supply chain problems and inflation. Speaking of inflation, Biden has come under pressure for the country's biggest rise in inflation in 40 years. In terms of climate, Biden appointed a special envoy a year ago. John Kerry has had meetings with China on reducing the effects of global warming. He also signed into law a plan to provide billions of dollars to help communities become more resilient to climate disasters. On foreign policy, Biden promised to re-engage with the global community after a fractious period under Trump. He rejoined the Paris Climate Accord and the World Health Organization. He also sought to reassure his Quad allies and signed a controversial nuclear deal with Australia and the UK. Meanwhile, his so-called Summit for Democracy was widely criticized, as was the country's chaotic exit from Afghanistan. No major breakthrough has been made yet on reviving the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, but negotiations continue.
Let's bring in Professor Joseph Gregory Mahoney from East China Normal University. He joins us via Skype. Professor Mahoney, it's good to see you. So Joe Biden, he started his presidency with the most votes, capping even Obama's. So what's happened now, a year on?
Well, polls are showing his approval ratings as ranging as low as 33%, but averaging closer to 40%. People are unhappy, as he acknowledged, with COVID outcomes, which, along with the massive stimulus and spending plans, massive increases in the money supply, the continuing trade war with China, all of these have contributed to big upticks in inflation. Now, this plus deepening political polarization, where neither his critics nor his supporters are really satisfied with his substantially stalled agenda, including efforts to reverse anti-democratic trends around the country. All of this bodes ill for Democrats in the midterm elections this fall, and likewise the prospects of his agenda going forward, and for the prospect of a second term 3 years from now. Of course, he's not entirely at fault for all of these shortcomings, but politically he will be held responsible. People are hurting economically and health-wise, and he's feeling their pain in the polls. But to put it simply, some moments, particularly crises, demand exceptional, transcendent leadership. Now, this is one of those moments, and his leadership has not met that standard in most American minds.
As you said, not all of it is his fault. He picked up the job during a tough time with the pandemic for a start. So, he made it clear that he was going to tackle the pandemic. This was his priority, and he has expanded vaccine availability, but it's clearly not under control in the U.S. What do you think of his performance?
I don't think Biden has done a terrible job on COVID when we compare it with his predecessor. But we do have to acknowledge that more Americans have died during his 1 year in office than died throughout the Trump administration. Now, he acknowledged, again, that people are tired of the disease, that a deep social fatigue is working against efforts to contain it, and that this has led some to give up hope on control efforts and just to move forward and let what happens happen. Unfortunately, that has meant almost 2,000 deaths a day recently. Now, to be fair, Omicron is a very, very difficult mutation to contain, even in countries with robust capacities. I was speaking with an American friend this morning whose 18-year-old son was just infected despite 3 jabs, and it took 48 hours to get a test result. He's already recovering, but there's no clear protocol for his close family or friends quarantining, no contact tracing, masks are not required at his school, and so on. And I think this illustrates the complete breakdown at work. The main problem here is that public health power is a form of police power, and effective social controls require the type of policing that neither the states nor even the federal courts are likely to allow from Washington, including mandatory testing or masking and vaccine mandates. In fact, I don't think Biden wants the political responsibility of really trying to impose these anyway. So we might say the U.S. Is and has been politically and systematically incapable of dealing with this type of crisis from the beginning, and all the more so given the intense polarization that preceded the outbreak and that has worsened during it.
I also want to ask you about foreign policy under the Biden administration. So he has been speaking out over Ukraine and the Russian-Ukrainian tensions over there on the borders, and he's warned of a disaster for Russia if Russia invades, right, of serious consequences. How would you characterize his policy towards Russia and Europe?
Well, I don't think that Putin is terribly frightened of Biden at this moment, for better or worse. But on the whole, his diplomacy has been a very strange mix of bright success, dark success, and failure, with direct implications for Europe, Russia, and Ukraine. His return to the Paris Agreement, his support for the World Health Organization, his support for COP26, these are examples of bright success. The agreement to join with China on the COP26 announcement, and these have helped bolster U.S.-Europe relations, even though we haven't actually seen much substance beyond rejoining and verbal commitments. But the dark success has been continuing Trump's fear-mongering against China and Russia in Europe, and continuing to undermine Russia and European relations, especially obsessively targeting the Nord Stream 2 project. And so on, all of which are arguably substantially contributing factors to the Ukraine crisis presently. Now, Russia is not entirely blameless here, but Biden and the Democrats' anti-Russian, anti-Trump fixation has helped provoke this situation. Now, in terms of failure, America's economic unilateralism with regard to monetary and fiscal responses to its failed COVID response, plus the failure to resolve the U.S.-China trade war, has exacerbated inflation globally, and this has put a lot of pressure on everyone around the world. Another example, of course, is the American unilateralism in Afghanistan, the human catastrophe that followed the human catastrophe of America's long occupation. Now, these and other developments have been received very poorly in Europe and elsewhere.